Roy Oswalt is undoubtedly the least notable of the four aces, and that's not meant to be an insult by any means. Maybe Oswalt would appreciate that designation. He's embraced the underdog mentality his whole life. Standing at 6 foot tall even on a good day, Oswalt was undersized for a pitcher and was perhaps overshadowed by his teammates, fellow starting pitchers Roger Clemens and Andy Pettitte on the Astros, as well as hitters like Jeff Bagwell and Craig Biggio. But I don't know if that bothered Roy Oswalt because much like the other Phillies aces, he was a pretty low-key guy. Last episode, we covered Cole Hamels and some of his antics that made him fall out of favor with the Philadelphia faithful at times, but in episode 1, we discussed Cliff Lee's reclusive nature, and next episode, we'll certainly talk about Roy Halladay's quiet demeanor. And I think that's a pretty big takeaway from this series. The Phillies' four aces were not flashy. They weren't in your face. They just wanted to pitch well, and to win baseball games. They were all business, and Roy Oswalt, well, he wasn't any different. If at any point you enjoy what you're watching, leave a like on the video, comment your thoughts or opinions, or personal memories of this era of baseball, and be sure to subscribe for more. Now, on to the video. Roy Oswalt's path to the Phillies was via trade after 9.5 impressive seasons with the Houston Astros. In those 9 full seasons he had there, he made 3 All-Star games, finished in the top 5 in NL Cy Young voting 5 times, and received NL MVP votes in 3 seasons. Oswalt's story begins in a small town in Mississippi. One scout from the Baltimore Orioles saw him play and was impressed, but was unimpressed by his lack of size. He was 5'10" and 150 pounds when he enrolled at Holmes Community College in the fall of 1995. Oswalt had always wanted to play baseball at Mississippi State, and when he finally drew their attention in 1996, he had a decision to make because he had also been selected by the Houston Astros in the 23rd round of the 1996 MLB Draft. Oswalt picked the Astros, and off to Florida he went to play in the Gulf Coast League. After 2 strong years in the minors, Oswalt began suffering from shoulder pain, a pain he believed was something serious, maybe a tear, but doctors assured him it was just tendinitis. Well, Roy thought this must have been the toughest case of tendinitis out there because he was taking 7 Advil a day just to ease the pain. Then comes the spark plug story, one of the anecdotes he'd share with teammates over the years. A journalist once asked his Astros teammate Craig Biggio if he was familiar with the spark plug story, and Biggio countered by asking him if he was familiar with Roy's story where he fished with dynamite. Anyway, as the spark plug story goes, Oswalt was working on his hunting truck when he checked one of the spark plug wires. He grabbed it, and as he recounted, the truck started, and the current just started shooting bolts through me. His hand tightened up, and he couldn't let go. He said it felt like he was holding onto that thing for 2 days. His foot slipped off the bumper and got thrown across the garage, and in one of the best quotes you'll hear today, he told his wife, "My truck done shocked the fire out of me, and my arm don't hurt no more." And for the next 14 years of his career, he never had any trouble with that arm anymore. During the 2001 season, the Astros called him up to the big leagues, and he quickly became one of the best pitchers in the NL. In his rookie year, he finished 2nd in Rookie of the Year voting, 5th in Cy Young Award voting, and received some MVP votes. From 2001 until 2007, Oswalt was a Cy Young finalist 5 times, a 2-time 20-game winner, and won an ERA title. You look back on the era, and he was obviously one of the best pitchers in the league, but he's not necessarily a guy we remember as being dominant. That's because he wasn't as big or flashy as the other guys, like maybe his teammate Roger Clemens, who was 6'4". Oswalt was a smaller, laid-back type of guy, and even still, Oswalt was one of the greatest big-game pitchers of all time. Wait, the greatest big-game pitcher of all time. Enter Bill James. If you've watched Moneyball, you should be familiar with Bill James, but he's more than just someone who was mentioned in a movie. He is one of the most important baseball statisticians of all time, the godfather of sabermetrics. In 2014, James came up with a formula to rank the best big-game pitchers since 1952. Number 1 on the list, Roy Oswalt. Take a second and think about every big-game pitcher you can imagine since 1952. Of course, there's more recent guys, but even guys like Sandy Koufax, Bob Gibson, Randy Johnson, Curt Schilling, John Smoltz, the list goes on, and Oswalt stands tall above all, according to James. Let me give you a quote from Bill James on what makes Oswalt number 1. Roy Oswalt won a tremendous number of big games for the Astros in the mid-2000s, but when there are 6 pennant races to follow and 2 wild cards, things get lost in the shuffle. Oswalt's constant drumbeat of big wins late in the season didn't have the impact of Bob Gibson winning 7 games in September of '64, but it's just the facts. Oswalt has won 80% of his big games. Wow. So when the Philadelphia Phillies lost the World Series in 2009 to the New York Yankees, what were they in need of? Well, Cliff Lee may have been great, but Cole Hamels struggled in the spotlight. Joe Blanton wasn't very good, and the 37-year-old Pedro Martinez experiment failed. The Phillies were in need of a big-game pitcher, and the longtime Astros hurler fit the bill. Midway through the 2010 season, the Phillies acquired Roy Oswalt in exchange for Jay Happ and minor leaguers Anthony Ghost and Jonathan VR. For the remainder of the 2010 season, Oswalt was phenomenal. He started 12 games for the Phillies where he went 7-1 with a 1.65 ERA. They went 10-2 in those games, and that's just talking about his contributions on the mound. On the August 24th game of that season, Ryan Howard was ejected in the 14th inning of a game that was coincidentally against Oswalt's former Astro team. Maybe Howard should have been wiser to argue in that situation, but shame on the umpire for ejecting a player in the 14th inning of a game where the team had nobody on the bench. That's why nobody likes umpires. But anyway, Raul Ibanez moved from left field to first base, and Roy Oswalt, of all people, came in to play left. And what are the odds Roy got a ball hit to him, which he put to rest with a swift putout? Oswalt actually came to the plate with the game on the line at the bottom of the 16th, but grounded out. Something to note here is how many fans were in the stands during the 14th inning. This was in the midst of the Phillies' 250-game sellout streak that lasted from 2009 until 2012, but the game started at 7 o'clock and lasted over 5 hours. We're sometime past 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night and the ballpark is packed. Just keep that in mind whenever somebody wants to talk negatively about this fan base. Phillies lost the game, but seeing number 44 in left field will always be a memorable moment for Phillies fans. In the divisional round, Oswalt pitched all right, but the Phillies pulled out a win anyway. Besides, no matter what he did, it was going to be tough to follow up Roy Halladay's Game 1 no-hitter. In Game 2 of the NLCS is where we saw that big game pitching we were talking about. Oswalt tossed 8 innings, surrendered just 3 hits and 1 run, and struck out 9 in a victory. Joe Blanton started Game 4 and didn't quite give them the start they were looking for, leading to Charlie Manuel relying on the bullpen early on. Manuel went to an arm he could trust in the 9th inning. The big game pitcher himself, Roy Oswalt, on 2 days' rest. Oswalt wasn't as sharp as the Phillies had hoped, and he ended up allowing a walk-off sacrifice fly, giving the Giants a 3-1 series lead. After a Game 5 victory, Oswalt was given the ball in a critical Game 6, and now, it's very important to remember, I haven't noted it yet in this video, but in previous episodes in this 4 Aces series I have. I'm going to right now. The Phillies traded away Cliff Lee in the offseason, so while their three-headed monster of Roy Halladay, Cole Hamels, and Roy Oswalt was no joke, they did have to throw Joe Blanton in Game 4, who I mentioned got beat up and led to the bullpen being enlisted early. That then led to Roy Oswalt pitching in the 9th inning of Game 4, and now down 3-2 in the series, Roy Oswalt had to start Game 6. This was Oswalt's 3rd appearance in 7 days. But in Roy Oswalt's final 10 starts of the regular season, he was 7-0 with a 1.17 ERA. He was 10-0 lifetime at Citizens Bank Park going into this one, so the Phillies were confident in him for Game 6. Oswalt, well, he went out there and battled like always, and despite allowing 9 hits, he limited the Giants to just 1 earned run over 6 innings. The Phillies had jumped out to a 2-0 lead in the first inning, but unfortunately, that's all they got. They lost 3-2, and the San Francisco Giants were headed to the World Series, while the Phillies were headed home disappointed. Maybe if they had Cliff Lee in 2010, things would have been different. We wouldn't have to wonder in 2011 because on December 14, 2010, Cliff Lee returned to the Phillies and the 4 Aces were assembled. Unfortunately, 2011 wasn't very kind to Roy Oswalt, at least not as kind as previous years had been. After a great start to the season, he was 3-0 with a 1.88 ERA in his first 4 starts. He took a leave of absence for personal reasons and missed about 3 weeks. He was fine upon his return until he left the game after just 2 innings, courtesy of lower back discomfort. He had a history of back trouble, and reports came out at the time that his career was in jeopardy. While doing the research for this video, Roy Oswalt is becoming one of my favorite players because I just love the guy's attitude. I alluded to this earlier, but he had the same demeanor as Roy Halladay and Cliff Lee. Chase Utley had it too, and these days, JT Realmuto embodies it for the Phils. It's just a laid-back, go-with-the-flow, don't cause a stir, whatever happens, happens attitude. When asked about the back problems putting his career in danger, Oswalt replied, "You throw as long as you can throw, and when you can't throw no more, you can't throw no more." The only concern is that Oswalt had mentioned in spring training this could be his last season. Then tornadoes hit his family's home and he started facing serious back pain. If there was ever a time to hang the cleats up, this might have been it. But luckily for the Phils, Oswalt returned after about a month and he pitched all right. In his final 10 starts, he went 5-4 with a 3.59 ERA, a little different from his final 10 starts a year ago. Oswalt got the ball in Game 3 of the NLDS in St. Louis, and what I remember is that squirrel shaking him up. In line with how he performed that season, Oswalt wasn't his sharpest, but it didn't help when a squirrel ran across home plate. He ended up getting out of that inning just fine, but he did allow a 2-run shot to David Freese, and the St. Louis Rally Squirrel was born. The Phillies had a chance to put the Cards away and eliminate them, but instead allowed them to force a Game 5, which they lost. But Game 5, well, that'll be discussed in the next episode, Episode 4, Roy Halladay. As for Oswalt, his contract expired at season's end, and despite retirement speculation, he went to the Rangers, much closer to his Mississippi home. He pitched a bit for the Rockies in 2013 and then decided to call it a career, an impressive one at that. So, what's the word on Roy Oswalt? Was he underrated? Well, yeah, but I don't know if he was necessarily underappreciated at the time. His dominance was reflected in Cy Young voting year after year, and I think fans recognized how good he was. He's just maybe a guy who isn't remembered as much as he should be. So that's my call to action for this video. Remind somebody how good Roy Oswalt was. He's obviously remembered for being an Astro, as he should be, but it shouldn't be forgotten how large a role he played for the 2010 Phillies especially, and then also the Four Aces in 2011. That does it for this one. If you enjoyed the video, do me a favor and leave a like. Feel free to comment and subscribe to the channel for more. Next up is the final episode of the Four Aces series, Roy Halladay. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.